Hello and happy Hogmanay to one and all from Mark in the Shed. It's not often these days that I put this onto video, but I have been asked by my friend Adrian if I would speak a little bit about point work, because as he pointed out, and it's very kind of him to do so, I don't seem to have a lot of trouble with older vintage models, because we're not allowed to call them toys anymore. Older vintage models running on flexi track and on Pico or Hornby points. So this is just a little bit to just explain how I managed to get that to happen. I'll be back in a minute with close-up. So here we are. Now the reason for this video is that my friend Adrian told me that he's thinking of changing all these Super 4 track to flexi track. Now I haven't got a piece of Super 4 track to show you. It's vastly different to flexi track. It's thicker, it's bigger, the rails are bigger and everything. Now if you're thinking of changing from the old system for running your vintage trains onto flexi, you've got to go for code 100. Simply, they allow for a greater range of flange depths on your rolling stock and locomotives. What do I mean by flange depth? Now here's an old, very old, it's an R28. This is from around 1958-ish. I say ish, it has the old type hook and bar coupling there, and the axles go right the way through. You can see the axle points there, because that's the old style. And the flange depth is the distance from the very edge of the wheel there to where the wheel actually sits on the track. That's flange depth. In my experience, anything before about 1963 won't run, not even on code 100. This won't run, and I'll show you it later. This will not run because of the flange depth. So you've got to consider that, Ed, and you've got to consider whether, even if you use code 100, whether or not some of your vintage trains won't run on it anyway. Now here's a standard Pico left hand point. Things to point out on this, and I'm going to have a little bit of a zoom to see if I can make things a little bit easier. One never can tell with these cameras. I'll get it in as close as I can. Okay. Doesn't matter whether it's Pico or whether it's Hornby. They always have a hole at the end, a hole there, and a hole there. That's so you can pin them down. In my experience, and I've been doing this a number of years, yes, they got them there, but they should also have a hole either side of the frog, simply because the way that these are made, with an amalgamation of some plastic type material and the nickel silver rail, the frog section here has a lot of give and a lot of spring in it, and it can actually be a little bump. The way that I've found to eliminate that is put a hole somewhere close to it on that side and a hole somewhere close to it on that side. Pin that down there also, and it takes away that little bit of give in the centre. That's going to help your vintage logos run. Also, one or two things to consider if you're running vintage logos on flexi is the frog here. Now the check rails aren't a lot of bother. You can usually get things to go through the check rails, but sometimes the check rails are a little bit tight to the rail, and therefore older stock won't pull through them very cleanly, and they'll ride up over it. Now if that happens, then I'm afraid there's no hope for it. You've got to change the wheels out on your vintage stuff. But also what I tend to do is, I don't know if the camera picks it up, I put a tiny little bend in there and in there. Got to be very gentle doing it, and that just helps to guide the wheels of your vintage locos and rolling stock through the frog. Also what I do is, I do the same there, a tiny little bend on the end of that, and a tiny little bend on the end of that. Just helps to ease your vintage stock through. Now on all points there are two little tongues, there and there. Now those little tongues, they are what conduct your electricity from either going straight ahead or going around the turnout to whatever line you want it to go to. You've got to clean these occasionally just by putting a little bit of something in there and just give them a little scrape of a dot. They're just tiny little things. If they break off, all isn't lost, because like I say, I've put a little tiny kink at the end of that and a little tiny kink at the end of that, which alleviates the problem of only having those two little tongues to conduct your electricity. And don't forget, all we're talking about is a maximum of 1 amp. Well, with my Hammond and Morgans we are anyway. So that's one or two little things that I do just to try and help. Now this, as you can see, is a very old Pico point. I shall be refurbishing this one. I'll clean up the ends, I'll put fresh fish plates on, I'll get a little bit of epoxy resin out, and anywhere where it looks dodgy, where the chairs may just be a little bit slack, get a little dot of epoxy resin, and hopefully this one will be good to go again. If it's not, I've lost nothing. Something else I do sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't. Your frog in the middle here can get worn down. Over time and overuse of running locos over and rolling stock, this part here, which has no rail attached to it, becomes like a bit of a hole, an indentation, with things bouncing on it all the time. If you can imagine the amount of times I run my things over it, then yeah, something's going to happen there sooner or later. If I can't afford to replace it, a turnout, sometimes you can get around that by putting a little piece of card just over like so, just a tiny little piece of card, and that helps alleviate the indentation that's caused by hours and hours of running over the point. Now, something else we must consider when we're talking about running vintage trains on flexi. I've mentioned it before, flange depth. This here, that's my old Polly from around about 1966. How can I be so sure? I was 5 years old when it was bought for me. Although it has had motor changes over the years, different couplings, the body's been patched up, the chassis and wheel set have always been the same. So this will, or should, run on flexi. Because it's an 040, sometimes they don't like point work. Sometimes. And when we're talking about running locos over flexi track of this era, What we also must consider is gauge, back to back gauge, and also you must keep the wheels very, very clean. If they aren't going to pick up electricity from the track, they're not going to go anywhere. So there we got poly there on the track, and as you can imagine, as it goes over the dead section, it could and should lose conductivity and stop because it's an 040. How can you tell if even your vintage loco is going to run? A rule of thumb is, and I'm going to get another one out of the box here to show you. A rule of thumb is basically, if you look at your wheels and you can see through your wheels, you're pretty much guaranteed that that will run on flexi track and over flexi points, because these didn't come in, if I'm not mistaken, till about 1961-ish. Before that they were a solid wheel and you couldn't see through them. So if your vintage loco has that, then they should run pretty much okay on flexi. And it's the same with any size of loco. If they've got the see-through wheels, you're pretty much okay. You're also pretty much okay when we come to talk about things like the high mech and diesel engines that are double-ended. This one is from around 1970-ish. The reason this one is particularly okay is because I'm not exactly sure of the year. The early ones of these only pick up from the motor end. The later ones, like this one, 1970-ish, they pick up from that end and that end. So you're not getting as many dropouts of power as you get with the earlier ones that only go from this end. If you saw my blue Pullman the other day, what I put up, that only picks up on the motor end, but it runs quite fine on the flexi track because it's after 1963. It's 1963-ish, and we can only say ish with any of these because I don't have any receipts to say when they were bought or how they were bought, or I'm probably the 4th, 5th, 6th owner of these, so we can't be sure. Some things give you indications, as with all things old. It would be the same if an expert was looking at the vase, he would know roughly what the year was. So that's that. And with your rolling stock, as we have spoken about earlier, if your rolling stock, if you can see the axle pins sticking through the end, don't touch them with a barge pole. They will not run. And I'm going to show you this one in a minute, and you'll hear why it won't run. And it's because the flange depth is too much, even for code 100 flexi track. If you already got some of these and you don't want to get rid of them or discard them, what you can do is change out the wheels. Pretty complicated thing to do, but it is possible and it can be quite successful, and I can show you because in my other drawer we have this. That's a little empty wagon, and I can tell you that wagon is before 1958, and I'll show you why. Originally this one had the through axles, but also on this one, if we look under there, we'll see that the rivet on the coupling hook is a solid rivet, as opposed to the later ones which are brass. This is a solid rivet, and Triang stopped using those rivets in 1958 and went to the hollow brass rivet. So we know this one is 1958 because of that, or before 1958. Now look, I see that this has had modern wheels fitted. You do that, and I'm not going to show you here now because it wasn't my idea. This has got modern wheels. The old wheels have been taken off. Pinpoint bearings have been put into the end of the axles. New wheels fitted, and then the ends of the axles have been stopped up with black tack. If you want to know how to do that, John's Amazing Trains did, I don't know if he still has, did have a tutorial on how to change your wheels out to make your old stuff run on your flexi track. So I think what I'll do now is I'll stop filming this bit here, and I'll show you this old coach running, and we'll see what it does, because I don't think this is going to run very well because of those axles. Won't be long. Right, here's that very old coach running with the old axles. It isn't actually that bad, but you will be able to pick up quite a wobble. Because of its age. Another thing to consider if you're talking about locos stalling on point work is, as a rule of thumb, if one loco only out of your fleet is stalling at a particular point, check the loco also. You may have a bit of dirt, it may need a clean, there may be a little crack in the pickup, something like that, or a loose wire even that's become slightly half unattached. If it's every loco that's doing it, you can pretty much guarantee that it's actually the point work that's doing it. If I can get this in here, I'm going to see if we can see this go over this point here. Now look at that. Did you see that wobble? Take it back the other way, because being an old coach and having mismatched couplings with that little jint you've got it going on with, it's actually uncoupling itself over my uncouplers. But you can see there, and do that again. Did you see how it actually rode over the top of the check rails? Let's see if I can get right in here. I'm trying to stay steady, and that that lamp post is in the way. Right, let's see. Let's see again. Here it goes again. Let's see if I can get that. The loco's going to go on no bother. Yeah, big wobble. Big wobble. That's because that is a pre-1960s coach. See what it does at this one. This point in here is a very old one. It's a steel one, and it has a plastic frog, but it's still kind of like the first of the Code 100s after Hornby scrapped the Super 4. Let's just see what it does. a little tiny wobble. Hope that's been some help to you, Adrian. I come round this way. This can often be awkward. It's a Pico long left hand point. Not a problem. There's a little wobble there from the coach, not the logo. So thank you, Adrian, for that rather interesting question. Now look at that. That's Triang. And again, coach wobbled, logo didn't, as we've come past all the little bits of boxes I've had out to do this. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, please consider it. I do think I have something of interest for modelers, especially modelers who, like me, run on a shoestring. So it just remains to say thanks for watching, and I'll be back sometime soon with a little video on different rolling stock wheels. Bye for now. Oh, and remember, Triang forever.